Should the presence of women on corporate boards be mandated by law in the European Union? Well, this is a pretty hot topic at the moment, and it also relates directly to corporate governance. Joining me now is someone who can shed some light on the whole topic, and he's INSEAD Professor Ludo van der Heyden. Thank you very much for being with us. You also teach a course in corporate governance for the Executive Development Program. Welcome to INSEAD Knowledge.
Good morning, Shelley.
Okay, the issue of women on boards is not so much a matter of why or if, but when and how. So how do some of the major European countries right now stack up?
Countries don't stack up very well. Norway is by far the best. It should also be said that the Scandinavian countries are actually doing quite well as well, with Sweden 25. And France is reasonable with 20%. And then there are some countries, including my own country, like Belgium, which is only 10%. And then some of the Latin countries are even doing worse. So it's a very mixed bag, so to speak.
That seems to be the major difficulty in actually getting women on boards. What are some of the other difficulties, and how do we overcome this last sort of glass ceiling executive suite issue?
I think that's a societal issue as much as a sort of a male-female issue. It's sort of, you know, in women, I think, are not present, and I think one should sort of, I think there are lots of explanations to that. But basically it's not 50-50 the way it is in society. In that sense, I am quite positive about the quota for women on boards, because that will actually set an example at the top. And if you have women on boards, then they will ask questions about gender diversity in executive ranks. And the problem is that, this is also research has shown, is that basically the selection criteria are very much male-centric. And so women have different career paths and have different interests, including, I mentioned, the networking, which basically means that they do not meet what are typically male criteria. And that is where even the women who hate quotas come to the conclusion that unless we have quotas, things will not change. And I think what needs to be looked at is to look at women in their specificity in terms of their own careers, their own profiles, their own demographics. And for example, one of the issues too is that age should be less of a criteria.
So what was the EU's Viviane Reding proposing? What was her call?
Well, her call, I think, was prompted by the Norwegian example. And I think by the conclusion of most women that basically come to the conclusion that most of women who are looking at this issue really hate the quota. But they come sort of regretfully to the conclusion that unless there is a quota, there will be very little change or very, very slow change. And just going up 1% a year, you know, would sort of take a generation or 40 or 2 generations, a generation being 20 years. So that's just not acceptable.
I realized too that Angela Merkel was against the quota idea, and of course so was David Cameron. I suppose that's to be expected. What's your reaction to quotas?
I'm swayed by the female argument, which is to say, you know, if we don't go for quota, then nothing will happen. I don't like the quota. I think it's not good for the women that will be appointed. In that sense, it's reverse discrimination. However, my view would be that to have a quota which is visible, which is more symbolic, which forces, in a certain way, cracks the ceiling of the glass ceiling, I think would be good. And I would sort of say, let's do a temporary quota. And then hope that in 5 or 10 years, you know, the quota will be gone. I think that would be my view, which is you need to nudge it instead of, you know, pushing it one way, and then I think it will become sort of normal affairs. And my hope is that, you know, in 10 years in Europe, this issue will be behind us. That would be fast. So I think it will be more an issue of a generation. Yeah.
INSEAD, led by you, did make a response to Viviane Reding's call for ideas and proposals. What was the INSEAD response?
The INSEAD response was actually that there was amazing convergence among male and female positions. The only divergence is on the quota, so on the how, not on the what. So people who have gone through the exercise of trying to get more women on boards basically are even confirming, saying, when we look at them, we find them amazingly good candidates. And the gender diversity has been a good thing on our board. So there is actually a uniform agreement that the quota is good, and that I thought was a positive response of our sample. Change doesn't happen on its own because it hasn't happened on its own, and that's where I feel one should be more humble and really crack the ceiling, not just at the board level, but also at the executive level. I mean, I've been working with companies where 90% of the women were the people buying, and of the 20 senior directors, there was not a single woman. I mean, that is just both not normal, it's absurd, it's not beneficial to the company. In a time when boards have more responsibility, including for stakeholders, one should admit that half of the stakeholders are women. And in that sense, I think the quota, I'm behind it, fully behind it. As I said, I would also say that in 5 to 10 years, this issue should be behind us.
Why do you think the issue of having women on boards has come to the foreground now?
I think that people sort of, when they look at it, they feel that this is not fair, this is not right. I think it has come with the realization that lots of things have to change in business. And so in that sense, this could be seen as a windfall of the financial crisis, which stereotypically is looked at very much as a male thing. And that's an interesting hypothesis, to sort of say if there had been more women on these boards, maybe it wouldn't have been as bad a crisis, because women actually look at risks sort of differently.
Okay, in terms of some of the other more pressing issues facing board members today, because there have been charges after the financial debacle of cronyism, et cetera, as boards came under the microscope. What are some of the issues in general facing corporate boards today that you focus on in your course?
Well, the idea of boards is that it's no longer sort of something you have to have like a regulation. It's no longer purely administrative function. There are two things that have changed in the world of boards, and I think very much due to the financial crisis or spurred on by the financial crisis. One is that to basically make boards the locus of responsibility of the company. CEOs come and go. When there's a problem, we fire the CEO. But let's assume there's been serious damage done. The CEO is gone. So who's responsible? And the answer is the corporation. Now, the corporation is a legal entity. Therefore, a corporation can be sued, can be held for liable, or can be held responsible. And that responsibility is exercised by the directors. And I think the understanding that directors are actually ultimately responsible for the corporation, that's one. Secondly, given that directors are more responsible, their actions are becoming more weighty and they influence performance of the company. And that is the second novelty in governance, is that boards can either help competitiveness or can actually destroy. I think one of the strongest examples where boards have become very active but actually destroyed a company would be, for example, an example of Hewlett-Packard or probably the Lehman Brothers, etc. Big acquisitions, high risk that people weren't ready for. These are ultimately the responsibility of the board.
Now, you've started to award certificates for people who successfully complete your course. Are we the only school to be doing this, or why is it important to have a certificate that says, I took this course?
I think we were certainly the only one who offered this certificate for international directors. I think most schools give certificates on a national basis, but actually in most countries the certificates for board members are given by directors' associations, like the Institute of Directors in the UK, who's been doing that for a long time. We do not train directors, we contribute to developing directors. And then we finally give a certification paper requirement where people actually are forced to show that they have applied concepts, theories, frameworks from the program to actual board settings.
In that vein, for my last question, give me your idea of what corporate boards might be like in the next 3 to 5 years.
I think smaller, less big committees, smaller because you need a lot of exchange. And if you have too many people, it becomes a committee meeting and you don't really have a great interaction. So smaller, more diverse, more international, because companies are increasingly global and have been too, certainly at board level, have been too local. And I think more expertise, much more competent, and more like, I would say this would be my last comment, probably more like soccer teams, where every season you review what the game will be like and whether you have the right players, and where you get some new directors and let some other people go. So there will be much more transition in boards, with the consequence there will be more opportunities for, to appoint women on these boards as well, because they will be more diverse as well.
Well, Ludo van der Heyden, thank you very much for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you, Shelley. It was a pleasure.